The history of video games, I like to go back to sort of the roots. Willie Higginbotham basically did a Pong-type game in 1958, just as a dawdle for a open house. And then Steve Russell, which I consider to be the fellow who I stood on the shoulders of, did a game called Space War for the PDP-1. And I played that in college while working in an amusement park, and I felt if I could bring Space War to the arcade, it'd make a lot of money. And so that led to the development of Computer Space, which we licensed to Nutting. We'd already been in the coin-operated game business for almost 2 years when Pong came along. And Pong was somewhat of an accident. It was what we considered to be too simple, but when it got all wired up, and it was done by Al Alcorn, he put in some twists to it that were just remarkable and made it a massively fun game. We felt in the early days that Atari had a very, very good brand. I mean, I can remember feeling really, really good when I looked, when they had the Atari logo on a shop in Blade Runner. I said, okay, so that's clearly going to last, that kind of thing. But more than that, we were very careful about how the logo looked, the trade dress of the company in terms of how the look and feel. We wanted to be a very, very sophisticated company, not just our products, not just our games, but the whole essence of our being. Atari was a big party company, and it was part of the corporate culture. We were doing a lot of manufacturing, and so the parties were a thank you for making quota. But it was also a way for people to communicate sort of across lines. We always wanted this horizontal, egalitarian business structure where, the person on the shipping dock could have a beer with the CEO and talk about what they felt the company could do better. I always felt that I learned something from every one of the parties, from the rank and file, the programmers, the engineers, the production workers. And I think that helped make the company a strong company. When Steve Jobs first started working at Atari, I was smitten by his intensity. And I've always felt that people that have a lot of passion are people who make things happen. I think that Steve had a very, very quick mind, fast, sharp intellect, able to figure out things very, very quickly and sometimes take it in a direction that was brand new. When he and Woz did Breakout for us, it was really a very, very good effort in a relatively short time. Almost mind-boggling how fast they did it. I think the first year we sold about 180,000, and we actually made a big mistake. The mistake was that we thought that people would buy an average of 3 cartridges. Of course, the very first ones that sold, they bought all the cartridges. So we ended up with a real dry spell until we could fill it, in which the only cartridge people got when they bought the 2600 was the Combat, the one that came with it. And then, of course, I think that there have been somewhere between 30 and 40 million 2600s that were sold ultimately. It was very clear that we needed a huge infusion of capital to get the 2600 into the market in the right way. In retrospect, I think we could have done it based on the cash that we had, and we had the opportunity to take it public, but not quite at the price that we wanted to. And I kind of regret, I wished I would have taken, I'll call it the hard road as opposed to the easy. But at the same time, you know, I really like the life I've had based on that, because it got me out into doing different things, which I've also found very, very rewarding. Well, when people call me a legend, I don't like to dwell on it. I mean, I think the world is way too interesting to dwell on your past. And I'm proud of my participation in this industry. But I think that what is really more remarkable is how we can take all the things we've learned and push it yet one step further. When looking back and trying to assess the real value of Atari and the video game business, I think that the video games were somewhat the training wheels of computer literacy, because all the early computers required you to hook things up to the TV set. Before the video game, everything that was on a video screen to them was coming from a station somewhere, a broadcaster. And several people said, now how do the people in the broadcast, in the station, know that I've turned this knob? You know, because the whole idea of locally generated video content was not there. I think video games also really paved the way for this whole idea of control of items, images, files, what have you, that was clearly necessary to leap into a population that was computer literate. And I think that we learned a tremendous amount about user interfaces, how people could interface with machines in a very, very, seamless way. I think all that research was part of the motion to get the world into computers. Computer games are psychologically very, very powerful. Kids now can multitask really well. A lot of the skills that they take right out of video games, resource management and some of those things, you wonder how many threads of activity can be handled at one time. On the bad side is anything that is powerful can be abused. People who play 48 hours nonstop of StarCraft or Worlds of Warcraft, that's clearly an abuse. Overuse of anything sort of takes a certain amount of humanity away. And we all know that in order to really build your brain, you got to do a whole bunch of different things. You just can't do the same thing over and over again. So I believe that's been a detriment because they're really good. Probably the biggest difference in game genres was the coin-operated world really required that games essentially give 25 cents worth of entertainment in about 3 minutes. You can think of them as short form. And short form games really have to deliver a punch very, very quickly. You have to know how to play them almost instantaneously. And the opportunity for setup and character development really wasn't there. You just had to get into the action and the gameplay itself had to carry the day. As you got into long form, you had much more chance for narrative, character development, scene setting, and it just gave a much more theatrical type of opportunity. Plus, don't forget, there's a whole area of graphics. It was sometimes hard to tell that a rocket ship was a rocket ship and a person was a person, because we were generally limited with an 8x8 matrix of dots. And of course, that's a long way away from where we are today. The big difference between storytelling in a movie and a video game is that the complete story isn't there, but supplied by the participant, by the player. And so in some ways, the video game pulls the player into the adventure as a participant, not just an observer.
Holy shit.
Well, I think the culture that surrounds gamers is different, not better than, not worse than, but different than. You go to some of these conventions where you have 6,000 people bring their PCs, hook it up to a gigabit Ethernet, and play games for 3 or 4 days. It's clearly a culture where everybody's having fun, everybody's got a smile on their face. They're living their life in a very, very, powerful way. The number of people that have migrated from being game players to being game designers, and from being game designers into being really hardcore, good programmers that are doing everything from banking systems to stock market software. When we started this thing, we found that the games that were most successful were those that were simple to learn, but impossible to master. And that metric is I think, the watchword even today. Extremely, extremely complex games may appeal to a few wireheads, but in general, simple to learn, but yet sucks you in such a way that you cannot feel like you're really exceeding the bounds of the game. Now, there's what we call the cheap way of ending the game, and that is just turning up the speed to where it becomes superhuman. That is wrong. You never want to do it that way. What you want to do is create a metric by which a person's greed for high score or a person's attempt to gain a little advantage actually defeats themselves. And once you get that metric down really well, you can have a good long playing game. The question of what is play comes back to some work that was actually done by a guy named Mikiai Csikszentmihalyi, who was a professor of psychology at, at the University of Chicago. And he basically spent a lot of time trying to decide what is happiness. And he found that people are most happy when they are challenged with a project, but not to the point where it's too difficult. Sort of that sweet spot of just hard enough, but not too easy. That they get into the sense of flow, he calls it. Well, it turns out that's identical to what we've been trying to do with video games. Make the games just hard enough, but not too easy. And that makes you happy. So to me, a new project makes me really happy. I get engaged, I get, all my juices are going. And in some ways, I feel like I haven't worked for the last 40 years, that I've been engaged in fascinating projects. And are there times that I don't want to take a meeting with an attorney or an accountant or something like that? Absolutely. But by and large, I think I and most of the people in this facility, they don't know the difference between work and play. It's all play for them. there are a lot of people that have dreams. I like to say everyone who has ever had a shower has had a good idea. It's the people who dry off and do something about them that make the difference. I think that the people who are driven by money tend to not do as well as the people who are driven by the passion of what they're doing. And then the money follows. And so to me, I love the process of company formation, of bringing people along, mentoring people. I'm really, really proud of the part that I played in Steve Jobs' life and the creation of Apple. You know, do I take anything away from Steve? No, but I really, you know, I'm proud of him. You know, that sounds paternalistic, but it's true. And when I see so many of the people that have worked for me over the years go off, start their own companies, create wonderful technologies, wonderful lives for themselves, it makes me happy.